The Multimedia Ninja Podcast, episode 45. Hello again, and welcome to the Multimedia Ninja Podcast, where it's all about surviving and thriving in the digital convergence. My name is Bradford Rogers, and I'll be interviewing some multimedia ninjas who are making things happen in their respective fields and sharing tips, tools, and insights for multimedia artists and content creators. As always, you can find show notes at themultimedianinja.com. This week, Grammy-winning mastering engineer Michael Graves. As you may know, in this podcast series, my friends and I will be talking about all things multimedia, including creativity, shaping your ideas, and how to be more productive doing it, regardless of what kind of content you're creating. We have got an exciting episode for you today, so what do you say we just let's get to it? Hello, welcome back to the Multimedia Ninja Podcast. Thank you for joining us this week. I think you will find it most amusing as usual, and if not amusing, at least informative. We have a treat. We're continuing the Grammy theme, as it were, with a gentleman who has two of them, if I'm counting correctly, and he is also in the audio realm, obviously with the Grammy, so we're sticking with the audio theme. And before I just crap up everything totally by trying to talk too much, let me just introduce our guest for this week, Grammy-winning mastering engineer and audio restoration specialist, Mr. Michael Graves. What's shaking, man?
All right. Glad to be here.
Good to have you back, sir. Or not back, but back into the Red Room, but back on the podcast for the first time.
I'm very happy to be here.
Easy for me to say. And so, of course, I've seen you like every other week or so at various functions for the Recording Academy.
We go way back.
Yes, and I believe you're on the board now as well, yes?
On the board, about to term out, but very happy.
Yes, I understand. You've been here 2 hours now. You go. But in the meantime, you have in the last few years won not one, but 2 Grammy Awards. And maybe I think you happened to bring a sample.
I brought a sample, yes.
Let's have a look at that puppy for the people on the video podcast.
Here's what one looks like.
Yeah. There we go. Camera 2. Look at there. You too can have a Grammy for just hundreds of thousands of hours of preparatory work and
that's all it takes.
Having the best product and not having Bruce Springsteen or Bob Dylan in the best historical album that year.
not having much of a social life, just living in a cave.
That's a given for the Multimedia Ninja. So this particular one was for
Hank Williams. This was 2 years ago, and it was a situation where there was a recording that was discovered that nobody knew existed.
Right. Somebody
found it in a garage sale, and I was contacted by Cheryl Pavelski at Omnivore Recordings.
Oh, yes.
And she was up against a deadline. She had to get this thing done. There's vinyl involved, so there's a long lead time. Anyway, I got an email. Can you do this? And can you do it quickly? So I took a look at the file, listened to it, and it's one of these things where I always do better work if I have the source to work with. Mm-hmm. So what I was originally given was a file that had been digitized already. Mm-hmm. And there were problems with it. The needle wasn't the best needle. The turntable wasn't the best turntable. And there had already been some audio restoration done to it. Mm-hmm. And it's hard for me to come in after all that and try to fix the initial problem, but also work on top of somebody else's.
Right.
Not necessarily somebody else's work, but anytime you use any kind of denoising software, it leaves behind artifacts. Mm-hmm. And if I go on top of that, it just multiplies it.
Right.
So I did the best I could, and I sent her a nice email saying, this is the best I can do, but really, honestly, if we want to do this right, I can. If you can have the record sent to me, I really feel like we can make this sound like it came off of the source tape. Mm-hmm. And she said, yes, let's do it.
Okay.
So I had the record was sent to me. It was a 16-inch transcription record.
Huh.
Most people haven't seen those. They were only.
I have not.
You have not. They're big. So I'll give you an idea. A regular LP is 12 inches. This is 16, and they were only sent out to radio stations. They were 15, 20 minutes per side. Anyway, this record was sent to me, and it was not in good shape. There were 3 records, I think, 2 or 3 records. Gouges on them, really bad shape. But with records, like if you put a record, any kind of record, on a turntable and play it, it's going to sound a certain way.
Right. And
there are certain like noises and pops and clicks and things are always going to be on there. Mm-hmm. But you can minimize that. We're using special styli.
Right.
And I've got about 20 or 30 of those. And the thing is, we think about audio restoration, or people that even think about it, you think about it with plugins and in the digital side. Mm-hmm. But a big part of audio restoration is what happens before it gets digitized, stuff that in the analog world. And it's critical, because if you don't get the analog part right, there's nothing you can do in the digital side to compensate for that. Mm-hmm. So I had the original records with me. I cleaned them off. I used something called a record vacuum, which is basically a fancy wet vac. So you take the record, you have a cleaning fluid on there, and then you have this little vacuum that sucks it all off.
Wow. Okay.
So now you have the record in the best state it's going to be. Mm-hmm. Now you got to find the right needle to make it sound the best. And that's trial and error. Sometimes it's just years of working with these different records and having a good idea what needle to use. So I found the right needle, and it did exactly what I wanted it to do. It cleaned up the noise. There's several kinds of noises that can be present on a record.
Right.
Some of those noises are easily dealt with in the digital world. Some are not. So the idea is to minimize the noises that the digital tools have a hard time with. Mm-hmm. And I was able to do that. So then we had that, have a good digital transfer, and then I go through and clean it up and do everything I need to do.
Right.
And it came out sounding great. It was. I mean, I was really happy with it. Came out better than I thought it was going to come out. It came out like you had just taken it off of a tape, which is what I wanted. And everybody was happy. I was the hero of the day.
Nice.
And then, things went from there.
All of a sudden, there's a Grammy.
Yay.
Now, I have a feeling we probably can't post the Hank Williams music without YouTube going ape. But we can put a link in the show notes, though.
Yeah. Actually, I have. We can put a link in there. I actually wrote a big blog post.
Let's link to that.
Okay, of how I step by step exactly what I did with before and after samples.
So I'm curious. So you got a different selection of styli or needles for the turntable for getting this stuff off the vinyl, and this was a 16-inch micro groove record. So I don't want to get too in the weeds here. Oh, sure,
why not? But a micro groove record is what most people are used to. So like an LP that you had in the 60s, 70s, or 80s, or 90s, whatever. That's a micro groove.
Okay.
You start getting earlier, and we start getting into some wider grooves like 78s. And you have different, there you go, right there. Dusty, but good.
Yes, this is a prop from our dining room. Just somebody spilled something on it. Oh, dear.
So different widths of needles become important then. And then, so for 78s, that's where most of my special needles come into play. Mm-hmm. If you think of needles as, a thing, let's see if I can get, coming down to a point, okay, like a needle. A 78 has been around since probably, let's say I'm working with a particular 78 that's, and I should say 78 RPM record. Mm-hmm. That's what my shorthand for. These were popular from 1900s up until mid-1940s. We can talk about this later. I don't want to get off, but
sure.
A lot of people come to me because a lot of times there are no master tapes. When we think about somebody wants to reissue something, we think somebody might think, well, let's just go back to the vault and get a tape.
Right.
Well,
it's not there.
It's not there. It doesn't exist. There's like the first 50 years of recorded history is there are no master tapes. You have to go back to these sources. So I take an old 78, back to needles. Yeah. So I've got different widths of needles, but because these records are so old, what happens is they start to degrade in the bottom of the groove. If a record's been played a bunch of times, especially with some of these old, they gouge out the bottom of it, and that's where all the noise is.
Huh.
So the needles I use are called truncated needles. So instead of it coming down to a point, the bottom has just been lopped off. So it sort of rides high in the groove. So we avoid the junk at the bottom of the groove, and we hear just the left and right walls. So so now you've got, so here's the variables. So I've got needles of different widths, and then the truncated part is a variable also.
Right.
So you can see how you can end up with a lot of different needles to fit the right occasion. And it's amazing. You'll play one needle, switch it out, put another one on, and it's just like somebody turned the lights on.
Right.
So it's amazing what a needle can do as far as audio restoration when we're talking with records or grooved discs, as we call them in the archiving world.
And now, since you dove down into all that, it's the stuff at the bottom of the groove. Are you talking about essentially like debris?
It could be debris. It could also be abuse. There was a thing for old Victrolas. They used a steel needle that sounded great, but it actually literally left a trail of dust behind it. It was gouging out the groove every time it played.
Gotcha.
So, especially if it was an old needle, it just really damaged it beyond repair, some of these things. I say beyond repair, but what if a lot of times I'm presented with a record that's the only known copy in existence, and it might be damaged beyond repair, but that's the only recording we have of this thing, so we got to try to make do with what we have.
And do you have more than one turntable or go-to turntable then?
I've got several turntables, but they're all the same one. It's so it's called an Technics SP15.
Again, I was going to guess Techniques.
Well, it's based on the famous SL1200, which is my favorite turntable for the consumer. And unfortunately, they discontinued it, I think, 2006 or something. And they're bringing it back now. But, I mean, it's DJ quality, it's audiophile quality, it's archival quality. It fits every bill. It's great. You can find them on eBay. They're still rock solid. The SP15 is based off that. It was only sold to radio stations. And what's different about it is it plays 78, which the SL1200s don't, which is important for me. And you can also, it wasn't sold with a tone arm, so you'd have this turntable. And it's really cool looking too. It's like it's from Star Trek or something. But you would buy the tone arm depending on what you needed. So you could buy a 12-inch tone arm, which would accommodate a 16-inch record. Or you could buy the smaller one and have, just the ability to play 12 inches or smaller.
So you have one set up for the 16-inch?
I have a big, setup, and I've got one in my office to just audition records for test pressings. So the one in my mastering suite is playback only. I don't do any digitization there. It's just either to test pressings or just to listen to something. The one in my transfer suite is set up to digitize everything. And I've got one, I get kind of crazy about these. I have one in storage in case my other two break, and I've brought one new in the box, which I'm just really happy to have.
Gotcha. Okay. Just in case.
So they stopped making them in 1989, I should say that. So to have one new in the box was quite a moment for me on eBay.
Yeah. And now for the 16 inches and stuff, do you there are things at the side like the post for the tone arm and all that? Do those have to be moved to accommodate?
Because the tone arm, it's confusing because the 12-inch tone arm will play the bigger records. I think a regular tone arm is like 8 inches. So the fact that it's 12 inches, the post it clears the it clears the 16-inch record. I don't know how that works out mathematically because you would think it wouldn't, but it does.
Yeah, because I was thinking you get your center spindle is one place regardless,
and
then you got a post for the arm somewhere regardless.
No, I didn't make it up.
Okay, I'll leave that one alone.
I didn't design that.
Bradford's trivia for the day. Okay.
I wish I had an answer to that.
That we'll let it slide this time. But let's talk about some music. One avenue that you've worked a lot with that is fascinating to me is records out of Africa and the Middle East. In fact, I see that the lovely Music of Morocco boxed set that you worked on recently, which is
a really cool set.
Awesome.
This is actually from tape, and these were from the Library of Congress. If I can post it up here.
There we go. Yeah.
Beautiful.
You should have this box.
You should. It's gorgeous. Look at the it's even got a leather-bound book in it with field notes. I'm sure that the audio only people are loving it.
Yes. Audio, you can imagine this awesome-looking leather-bound book.
So what's cool about this is, Paul Bowles, the author.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I knew there was another thing that I loved about this.
Yeah, okay. I mean, first of all, I love this. Yeah, I love the story of Paul Bowles going to, I think he's like in his 20s, and he's in Europe, and he's hanging out with Aaron Copland, and Gertrude Stein tells both of them they should go to Tangiers, and he does.
Right.
That's how he gets to Morocco. Copland was not loving the folk music as much as Bowles, so he stayed, and after a few years, he really somehow he got a grant from the Library of Congress to go around and record all these folk musicians, and that was not easy. So there's no electrical grid once you get out of the main cities. So you got to have, he's lugging around an Ampex 601. He's got to find electricity, and so it's limits to how far in the country he can go, or bring, sort of find some place where he can plug in,
right,
and then bring the musicians in. So it's fascinating. He captured all these various musicians doing their thing in 1959, and it's a really great snapshot in time.
Gotcha.
And I think this was issued, I forgot when this was issued on LP by the Library of Congress. I'm thinking maybe, I could be wrong, 70s, 80s, but it was only a double LP. This is a 4 CD set. This is completely expanded with new liner notes, and we have some cool analogy of the whole thing.
It's a visual and audio experience.
Yes, it's all of that.
Which I'll put the link to that on the show notes as well.
And this is on Dust to Digital, a local label that does great stuff. Yeah,
talk about Dust to Digital and who that is, how you got involved, and all that good stuff.
Well, I probably wouldn't be here without Dust to Digital, honestly. So I got into this whole music business thing. I'd say I sort of snuck in, or I fell in, or however. It wasn't a planned thing. Just audio restoration and transferring was a hobby of mine. This is about probably 97, 98.
And your real gig was?
My real gig was, well, let's go back a little further. So out of high school, I went to work for Delta Airlines right out of high school. Didn't go to school. I was a crazy kid. I needed some structure in my life, so loading airplanes seemed like a good idea. I did that for 8 years, and then I left Delta to get a degree in business at GSU. And
yes, love some GSU.
Hey. And that was, maturity on my side at that time was, in hindsight, was a great way to do the whole experience, because I was, like I said, I had work experience, maturity, and I was paying for the damn thing. So I was in the front row of all these classes, getting the most of my money. I graduated in 98, and all I wanted for graduation was a CDR burner for my Gateway 2000 computer.
Okay.
And this was a big deal. This was I think a 4X CD burner was probably $800. But the idea of taking my record collection that I have been collecting since I was a kid, and I moved around to every state with me when I was working for Delta, and I had a lot of rare B-sides and singles and 12 inches from Europe that were never going to be on CD, and I wanted just the idea of putting them on CD. It sounds so quaint now, but that fascinated the hell out of me. So I got the CD burner, and I just, that's all I wanted to do was put all my stuff on CD. I quickly realized what a time suck that was, and understanding all of it. And then people started coming to me with their records. More and more friends started coming to the records, so I started charging for it. And then, I became intrigued with the whole idea of this whole digitization and preservation and restoration aspect. It all sort of comes together. I did some bigger jobs for institutional operations, libraries, archives, and I did a big one for GSU, their Johnny Mercer collection. Oh, yes. I digitized all that stuff. And that's where the Dust to Digital thing comes in. So I just completed this Johnny Mercer project, and I'm a huge fan of Johnny Mercer, even before I got it, so I was just over the moon when I started working on this stuff. Finished that, and then Lance Ledbetter called up the archivist at GSU and asked, hey, do you know anybody in town that does this sort of thing? I've got a label that specializes in old recordings. And she said, yeah, I'd call this guy Mike Graves. And that was it. And it turns out we had a class in GSU together. We had a marketing class together.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Didn't even know. So that's how that relationship started. He wanted to work with somebody local. He had done his first project, and his first project was the famous Goodbye Babylon, and that's something that took him, I think, like 6 years to do. But
wow,
out of the park, his first project, nominated for a Grammy for Best Historical Album. But then I came along, and I've done pretty much everything for him since then. And we've gotten a few Grammy nominations together, a Grammy together. So it's been a great relationship, and I love working with their music. So
Awesome.
That's
and
great.
they are also our fellow Atlantans or
Yes.
Decaturans?
Yes, they are East Atlantans.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Awesome. And I should note that you are just right down the street here, too.
I know. This is like the area. There's a lot of us here.
I would maintain this is where all the really important people are.
That's right.
Oh, sure. So we did, you've done the Morocco thing.
Yeah.
By the way, what was your other Grammy? It was Out of Africa.
It was for Dust to Digital.
78.
Nope, that was nominated for that.
Oh.
No, it's all right. I got so lucky. My first nomination was my first win, and it was for Dust to Digital. It was a project called Art of Field Recording.
That's it.
Yeah, I can almost remember the full title. Anyway, it was a collection of field recordings by this guy named Art Rosenbaum, who is a field recordist, has been doing it most of his life. He's also an art teacher at UGA in Athens, but an amazing body of work. So it was just a collection of his 4-CD set, a collection of his work from all over the United States.
Gotcha.
Really cool stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I know I've seen you out at the Grammys a number of times. You're usually getting the paid trip, or the paid seats.
That's nice.
Still got to buy the airplane ticket.
That's right. And hotel.
So how many times have you been?
5 times. I've been nominated 6.
Wow.
The one was a double year. The year before last.
Okay.
Yeah, the Hank Williams year. I was nominated for Hank and for another Dust Digital project.
Right.
And that was it was a collection of recordings from Southeast Asia. That was a great set too.
Very nice. Awesome. So have you traveled any in the course of any of these recordings from around the world, or are you getting them all pretty much?
I'm getting them all delivered to me. I've had offers. I'd work with a guy.
That's what I was getting to.
Yeah, I work with a guy. He runs a label called Analog Africa, and he does some really great stuff. And he is, he's the guy that will go and spend 2 months in Benin, West Africa, to just collect records and just totally immerse himself in the culture and find the record collection that nobody else will find.
Right.
It's pretty amazing. And he does this all. So he's really known for his collection of recordings from West Africa. Mm-hmm. And he's got records from everywhere. He has a huge warehouse, and he's based out of Frankfurt. But he has a huge warehouse there with all these records that are just mind-blowing. I actually did go to Frankfurt to help him set up. He was sending his records to me. And FedEx, this starts to add up after a while. So we decided, look, let me go over there with you, and I'll set up a nice digitization setup. We'll get you a record vacuum. We'll get you a nice record. We'll get you some needles and a nice AD converter. And then you can, transfer to your heart's content and then just transfer them to me, and I can work on them, which it's worked out great.
Awesome.
I wish I could do that with a lot of people, because it's amazing how what I think of such second nature about getting a good, clean record signal. A lot of younger people, and he's not one of them, but I've been getting a lot of transfers lately that it's just really a bad needle. And then they'll save it as an MP3, and not even a good MP3, like a 128.
Can you fix this?
Yeah, no, and I used to say never do that, but then I've had to really lower my bar on some of these things, because you realize that the barrier, the communication barrier, starts to become really burdensome after a while when you're trying to explain. And someone who doesn't speak your language, or we both speak sort of broken languages, we start talking about, bit depths and needles and all this esoteric stuff. Sometimes I just okay, just send it to me. I'll do what I can do with it. Right.
Well, a sidebar, you mentioned the AD converter. I just want to highlight for all you Ninja Nation out there, because we've kind of touched on this before. Some of you know, some of you may not, but AD converter, when you have something that's analog, like sound in the environment or on an analog device, and you need to get it in your computer, which is digital, which just samples the tone every, 44,000 times or 48,000 times or whatever per second, you have to have something to change the analog into the digital, and the quality of those can vary greatly. I personally am a fan of Apogee as far as things that I can afford that are awesome, but you'll get, especially when you first got, I don't want to pick on anybody, but some of the things that worked natively with Pro Tools to start with were just not the same.
We all started,
So you can have, a $95 converter that you got at I won't say Radio Shack, but
you can have a $10 converter that you bought.
And it's not the same deal.
That's the thing. Converters, so sort of like what I was talking about earlier about getting the analog part right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you spend all this time and money with the right needles and the right turntable and all this stuff, getting the right wiring right. And equally critical is that point where that analog sound is changed to digital.
Mm-hmm.
And if you take the short route there, all that work before is useless because you've taken this nice clean signal and converted it to digital.
Mm-hmm.
It might say 192 24-bit,
right?
But it's just not going to sound
just
good.
Grainy crap.
And you can get decent converters these days. The level of quality is great.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I've started with I was probably maybe a couple $100 converter. I'm using one now. I use a Prism 88XR,
mm-hmm.
which costs more than my car probably, but it's great. I also. But when you start getting these upper echelon of converters, I'm not sure how much more you're really gaining. But,
right.
But
it is incremental.
It is incremental, and it's nice having when you start getting these upper level converters. They're sort of beyond reproach.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just don't even.
Yeah. So, little side question: what sample rate and bit depth do you usually work with when you're doing your own conversion?
So I've started changing my mind about this. I used to be all about the 9624 and even higher.
Which is 96 kilohertz sample rate and 24-bit depth, 24 bits.
Yeah. What I've been reading a lot from people, not from pundits and not from engineers, but I looking at the people, not like studio engineers. I'm talking about the engineers that actually build the conversion.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's an article Lavery wrote. It's more about the converter itself than the sample rate,
mm-hmm.
and the design architecture of that converter. So, having said that, I have no problem working with 44.116 recordings,
mm-hmm.
24-bit. I even have no problem working with 16-bit if that's what somebody gives me. I think it's an order.
With the CDs, the classic CDs.
And it's not. So when you think of, there's a really good, I can't remember what there's a YouTube video where this guy really lays out in technical terms bit depth, what it really means, and then sample rate. And bit depth turns out it's really just noise floor. You
mm-hmm.
think about greater resolution, like it's HD TV, like it looks clearer.
Mm-hmm.
Like 24-bit is going to somehow make your audio open up and it's just really about noise floor and how far that noise floor down. And we're
mm-hmm.
talking like 96 dB below. We're talking
mm-hmm.
like you can't even nobody hear this stuff. But I don't want to get too far in that. But I look at all the various sound things I have to deal with, MP3 artifacts, crummy needles, bad tone arms that echo, bad wiring problems, and a host of other things. Whether or not it's 16-bit or 24-bit is so far down the list.
Right.
If I can get these other things right, if I'm dealing with bad problems, it doesn't matter to me if it's 24 or 16-bit.
Right.
Now, if it's a brand new recording, I'm going to want it in a higher bit depth. But order of importance for me is getting just the clean sound. If you have, like I said, a crummy needle with a bad turntable, a 24-bit 96 recording is not going to make that any better.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, right.
Don't mind Daisy, by the way. She's just breakdancing.
I'll work with whatever anybody sends me.
Gotcha.
And I know it's good to also know how sample rates and bit rates work and how to go in between and use good converters. But for my own personal stuff, if I'm working with my own records, I do it 44.1 24-bit.
Gotcha. So, and I think there's a good analogy if I'm saying this right, in your in video,
mm-hmm.
where you have your millions of colors and millions plus of colors or whatever. You got your basic RGB, and then you got the expanded codecs and whatever. But so the bit rate. Or the sampling rate is going to be how many times per second it takes a sample of the audio.
Right.
The bit depth is going to be equivalent to the palette of colors as to how many steps worth of volume, discrete levels. So 24-bit is going to have a lot more level information about the exact volume level than the 16-bit or, God forbid, the 8-bit.
But in practice, really all it boils down to is noise floor.
Mm-hmm.
You could make it as simple as that.
Gotcha. Words to live by. Actually, I don't want to... we're going to run out of time, but if you can come back, I'd like to actually maybe play some musical examples that you've worked on, and talk a little bit more about all the cool stuff that you're doing. So if that's cool with you, ladies and gentlemen of the studio audience, for the moment, and in general, will you give it up for, and please anticipate seeing next episode, Mr. Michael Graves. Well, that just about wraps up another episode of the Multimedia Ninja Podcast. I hope you'll come back next week and bring your friends. Don't forget you can subscribe to the Multimedia Ninja Podcast at themultimedianinja.com. Right there, you'll find the subscribe button. It'll take you to whatever you need to do for your iPhone, your iTunes on your desktop, your Android, what have you. And on every episode, you will also see a link for the YouTube video version, which we should be getting on iTunes soon, God willing. At any rate, I hope you have an excellent week. Do some good work. Come back and check out the next episode. And we'll see you then. Thank you.